Thank you. Each year at the Ethical Society, we organize our programs around a theme. Our theme this year is Building an Ethical Future, and in September we are exploring the future of war. To speak to that theme, it is now my pleasure to introduce Reverend Jim Poinsett, who will give a talk called Solidarity over Hostility. Reverend Jim Poinsett serves as the Executive Director of the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis, a nonprofit representing 34 religious organizations that seeks to bridge divisions and strengthen community through the understanding, engagement, and advocacy. Jim holds a Master's of Divinity degree from Yale University Divinity School and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Ball State University. Please welcome Jim Poinsett.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you all for coming out on such a dreary, rainy morning. It speaks to the gift of this community that you are willing to make such a journey on such a dreary day. So I'm glad for your presence here, and it is good to be with you. I bring greetings to you from the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis. As Kyle mentioned in his kind introduction, the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis is a non-sectarian nonprofit representing over 30 communities of faith and conscience here in the St. Louis metropolitan area. Jewish congregations, Muslim mosques, Hindu temples, Baha'i, Buddhist, Christian, and as well as the Ethical Society. We are so pleased that James, your senior leader, serves on our cabinet, and he is a regular part of our Religious Leaders Forum, which brings together leaders from various religious organizations to strengthen religion's collective role in advancing equity and the common good in our region. Interfaith Partnership provides platforms for diverse religious voices to be heard, and as Kyle mentioned, we do that through programs of understanding, engagement, and advocacy. Our mission is to deepen understanding and respect and appreciation across lines of religious difference and bravely bring people together for building a more inclusive St. Louis where religious and non-religious people can feel safe and supported in practicing their beliefs and can flourish together as neighbors. My own involvement in interfaith work has been quite a journey. My day job is Executive Director of the Interfaith Partnership, and as Kyle mentioned, I'm ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, but I'm a second career clergy person. My previous vocation was being a political operative and lobbyist in Washington, D.C., working for a big tobacco. Now, we can do a whole other platform talk on that experience. I noticed you have an opening on November 6th. Maybe we'll come back and do that. But back then, I had no idea what interfaith work was or that it was even a thing. But while I was living and working in Washington, as you might imagine, and we probably hoped, that I began wrestling with some of the moral and ethical implications of what I was doing. Then, on September 11th, 2001, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. From my K Street office, I could see the smoke rising from the Pentagon. At that moment, I knew it was time to do something different with my life, but I was unsure what that might be. I felt called to a theological education to help reframe who I was and what I was doing. So I was led to Yale University Divinity School in New Haven, Connecticut. I think Armando and I might have been there at the same time, right? Yeah, right. It was there that I met my now late wife, Robin. We decided that we were going to build a life together, but she had this one caveat. She said, "We can live wherever you like, as long as it's in Connecticut." And that left me with a quandary. What was I supposed to do now? Look, when I went to divinity school, I was on a quest for better understanding of myself and my place in the world, but I had no desire or even a reason to consider parish ministry or being a minister. My idea was that I was going to go back to D.C., work in nonprofit advocacy and do something better for the world than keeping it safe for Joe Camel and the Marlboro Man. I met Robin because she was a lecturer in the political science department at Yale. Her field was international relations. We met because she happened to be up at the divinity school doing research on how religion impacted international affairs. Now remember the context. This was just a couple years after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11th. Those of you that are my generation or maybe a little older may remember how traumatizing that event was. And in fact, my late wife was a 9/11 widow. Robin had this deep longing to know how this type of violence, which had directly affected her life, could happen in the name of God. Those of you around at the time might have found yourself thinking those same things. I know that I was perplexed. And that confusion and curiosity led me to parish ministry. Not only because I wanted to be employed, but I wanted to use that ministry to come alongside Robin and her work to have a better understanding of how someone can claim an allegiance to God but still do violence in God's name. Through my ministry, I became involved with the New York State Council of Churches, and then following Robin's death, I moved to Philadelphia and became involved with our sister organization there, Interfaith Philadelphia. And eventually I wound up here. One of the first things that I learned in doing interfaith work is that dealing with diversity it's not rocket science. Actually, it's far more difficult. The U.S. is made up of many races, cultures, and religions where people of different faiths and beliefs come and live alongside each other, sometimes happily, sometimes not so happily. A multi-faith society is one where there are many different religions. Now, this is different from a multi-ethnic society, which is about race. But we're talking about a multi-religious society. And the goal of a multi-religious society, particularly in a well-functioning democracy, is religious pluralism. Now, you all are probably aware that pluralism comes from the word plural, meaning more than one or two. Where there is religious pluralism, there are different religions living together that have an equal right to exist. It can also refer to the attitude that people believe that people with different religious ideas can work alongside one another. Diana Eck of the Harvard Pluralism Project makes a useful distinction between diversity and pluralism. Diversity is simply the fact that people of different identities and backgrounds and worldviews are living together in close quarters. The term, as she uses it, suggests nothing about how these individuals and communities relate to one another. Pluralism, on the other hand, in Eck's definition, is the energetic engagement of difference towards positive ends. Diversity is simply a demographic fact. Pluralism is a hard-won achievement. Putnam and Campbell in American Grace note that religiously diverse populations are prone to violence precisely because religious symbols are so potent. Religious networks are so large, and religious institutions are so strong that when some kind of tension between different religious groups emerges, the conflict can be especially ugly. And certainly, there is a long list of conflicts around the world where religion has played a role. But violence inspired by religious intolerance is easier described than actually defined. There are frequent debates over the extent to which religion plays a predominant role in a given conflict. Conflicts may not be rooted in strictly religion and instead be a cover for the underlying secular power, ethnic, social, political, and economic reasons for conflict. And a further complication is that the word religion itself is difficult to define, particularly when attempting to apply it to non-Western cultures. Keeping that in mind, there's still no denying that religious violence has experienced a sort of revival lately. The past decade has witnessed a sharp increase in violent sectarian and religious tensions. According to Pew, in 2018, more than a quarter of the world's countries experienced a high incidence of hostilities motivated by religious hatred. Unfortunately, the risk of sectarian violence is unlikely to go away anytime soon. More than 84% of the world's population identifies themselves with a religious group, according to Pew. In the United States, that number's closer to 70%, even though only 70% claim a religious identification or affiliation, I should say, 90% of Americans still believe in the existence of God. Through the years, I've discovered that the violence that happens in God's name does not just happen in explosive, dramatic moments. It doesn't just happen in all the things that we see on TV or are in far-off countries, although it does. It also happens in our local communities in poignant and insidious ways. We see examples of all this around us all the time. There are violent acts against people and communities of faith. In May, a 14-year-old Afghan refugee near Joplin died by suicide after being bullied because of his Muslim faith. Here in St. Louis in the Central West End in November 2021, Central Reform Congregation thwarted a bomb threat to its synagogue, thanks to the work of its members, the FBI, and the St. Louis Police Department. This summer, black churches in Springfield were vandalized with swastikas and other racist markings. There are incidents of scapegoating or rumor mongering, acts of anti-Semitism, Kanye West, Kyrie Irving this week, and xenophobia towards Asian and Pacific Island people. All of those are on the rise. And it happens in our civic discourse, which is becoming more polluted as we become more and more polarized. The use of Christian symbols was more than prevalent on the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, and those symbols continue to be used to justify views, stoke fear, and provoke violence. And you see the news, the list goes on and on and on. The question is, how is it that religions, which supposedly espouse peace, love, and harmony, are so commonly connected with intolerance and violent aggression? Does fidelity to a particular religion require one to stand against other religions as rivals, imposters, or enemies? How can we move from hostility to solidarity? What we strive to do at the Interfaith Partnership is to bridge those divisions, to bring unity, to make ours a community that can flourish, that can live together and be neighbors with and for one another. For us, the path is fostering respect for different religious identities, then nurturing those relationships between religiously diverse communities, and then bonding these communities around a commitment to the common good. We believe the only way that we can overcome the violence caused by our divisions, even the violence done in God's name, is to build relationships with one another, to facilitate networks of engagement between people of different religious communities. Instead of looking for differences, we try to identify the resonances, to help people connect with their own religious identities and develop powerful relationships with people from other religious identities. One such resonance that has been particularly helpful in interfaith work is lifting up through the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Though primarily identified with the Christian tradition, this simple, compassion, and generous ethic transcends religious differences. Indeed, this is a basic teaching that is found in various forms in almost all of the world's religions. This ethic invites us, regardless of religious identity, to consider that we actually have something to do, that we all have an important role to play in helping people to live whole lives, to build up rather than to tear down, to encourage rather than disparage, to love rather than hate, to bless rather than curse. Philo of Alexandria, Homer, and others articulated the idea and reminded us that treating others as we want to be treated is indeed good. I don't think it's a big mystery why the great religions of the world hold in common as something as simple as the golden rule. It's because people are people, and we need to remind ourselves that we don't have the luxury of treating anyone as expendable, as if that's any luxury at all. For Muslims, it is no one of you is a believer until he desires for his brothers and sisters that which he desires for himself. For Hindus, whatever you consider injurious to yourself, never do to others. This is the essence of the Dharma. For Buddhists, hurt not others in ways but yourself would find hurtful. And even from what I understand, the humanist core beliefs, which were recited earlier by Sage, affirms the dignity and worth of all people and promotes compassion for all people all the time. When Rabbi Hillel was asked to teach the entire Torah while standing on one foot, he replied, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow men and women. That is the entire Torah. All the rest is commentary." And then he added this twist: "Now go and study." That's an important addendum. We can't possibly know how others want to be treated unless we actually know them. I believe that people of faith and religious communities are an essential part of bridging the current social and political divides. After all, we all supposedly share this ethic. But the only way that we can fully live into this ethic and to overcome the violence caused by our divisions is to build relationships with one another. When we get to know one another and learn from one another, we can see the dignity and worth of each other. This golden rule isn't about doing something impossible. It's about not labeling someone as an enemy and trying to love them. This ethic is about labeling people, all people, as valued and worthy of compassion, seeing dignity and worthiness in each person, and then living in a way that shows that we understand that given dignity is something that we all share in. Because with that in mind, we would treat each other as we want to be treated. Instead of hardness, we enact kindness. Instead of indifference, we engage with one another. Instead of suffocating egotism, we recognize the value of one another. We would focus on what makes us human and sacred rather than what tears us apart. And then tensions would ease, hearts grow softer, souls become roomier. Love one another, respect one another, treat one another with humanity. No doubt about it, this is hard work. But think about it. Think about what could be if we fully lived this shared ethic, if we were able to love in spite of circumstances or our prejudices, if we could work together to bridge differences rather than magnify them, if we could offer ourselves for the work of transformation and the gift of peace. Think how easy it would be to give and to receive, to love and be loved, to respect each other as human beings. When we get to know one another and learn from one another, we can then move from hostility to solidarity. Striving for solidarity allows a person to see each religious tradition, including their own, as having its own value, as well as its strengths, and most importantly, its weaknesses. It frees us to affirm and celebrate all that is good in each religious tradition and to build relationships of mutual sharing and respectful collaboration with people of all traditions so each can keep growing and contributing to each other's well-being. We can recognize more easily one another as neighbor, and dare I even say it, and this is the dream, to even love one another. That's an audacious goal, but that is the goal of the Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis. It is true that religion has played a crucial role in promoting conflict and polarization. Yet I believe that religious communities are an essential part of bridging the current social and political divides. I believe that we can bridge divides rather than make them deeper and locate bridge building in a larger sense of civic engagement and community. This weekend is my 3rd anniversary as Executive Director of the Interfaith Partnership. And during these 3 years, I have seen communities of faith and conscience that are part of the Interfaith Partnership go about this bridge building in amazing and inspiring ways. We've been offering steady connection during the pandemic, during time of social distancing, such as our Sprouts of Peace program, providing families with digital learning and engagement tools so they can continue building interfaith relationships with one another. Meeting moral obligations for loving our neighbors, such as the Sixth of St. Louis and the Islamic Foundation of St. Louis and area churches working together to provide food and vaccinations in vulnerable neighborhoods. Holding hope in the face of despair, faith leaders and their congregations coming from different traditions coming together to offer support and lifting up concerns and hopes in our community ravaged by shootings and violence. Those are just a few of the examples over these past years, and there are many more. Each year, Interfaith Partnership hosts an annual banquet. Last year, in October of 2021, we were able to gather in person for the first time in 2 years. Over 300 people gathered safely at the Hindu temple in Baldwin. The theme, overcoming adversity together. We highlighted the courage, compassion, and dedication to loving one's neighbor that makes St. Louis's interfaith community so special. And we celebrated a promise of what is possible when we are unified in service and love. It was an incredible evening. There were prayers from a Jewish rabbi, a Baptist preacher, a Sikh priest, and a Muslim man. Buddhist monks chanted sutras. Hindu dancers shared sacred dances. There was a feast of rich food, a langar meal prepared by the Sikhs of St. Louis. In the Sikh tradition, the langar serves as a ritualistic expression of the equality of all humans. I was moved by the sight of Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians sitting side by side, sharing a meal, laughing, telling stories, seeing the divine in one another. For a few short hours, we were able to push back the isolation and fear and hatred and violence of the past 2 years and model a better world. My heart was filled with gratitude and dedication for those continuing to bridge divisions, fostering relationships, and building a St. Louis where we can all flourish together as neighbors. No matter how God was named that night, it was absolutely powerfully comforting to realize the presence of the divine in that place. All of it had me feeling deeply hopeful about the future. For me, it was a glimpse of what's possible when solidarity replaces hostility. From all the way back in 2001 to more than 22 years later, we are reminded that the world is a fractured place. You only need to look back to the pandemic spawned upheaval and the near constant vitriol and anger that permeates our days to see just how fragile our community really is. When people of faith from different backgrounds and traditions get to know one another, their community is stronger, experiences less prejudice and bigotry, and is more resilient. I'm confident in the unique ability of St. Louis' religious communities to build powerful relationships through collaboration and cooperation to overcome polarity and fear with understanding. In solidarity, we can help bolster our fragile community and mend this fractured world by showing love and respect for one another. In solidarity, we can build a more thriving and stronger community where everybody feels valued and has a role to play. In solidarity, we can create a better St. Louis full of peace and understanding, more kind, compassionate, generous, and just. May it be so. Thank you.